Welcome back, everyone, to Feldin-salen for the closing session of this conference. And I really hope that we have better luck or skills today on the running the technical side of this, but I think it will be great today. We have a keynote waiting. But before I introduce her, I just want to say that we have a new Menti code for today's session. So please note, I think it's going to be really interactive keynote today. So please note the new Menti code for today. And with that said, I am so happy to introduce Maha Bali, Associate Professor of Practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. Welcome, Maha.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I always say this because some people are in the morning, some people are afternoon, some people at night. This works all the time, beginning and end of a day. Hello, goodbye, and everything. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about socially just distributed care networks. And sometimes my talks go off on tangents, but hopefully it'll all come together in the end. And so I'm going to start off right away with some Mentimeter questions, because I always want to know things like how you're doing. So I'm just going to start off with that. And yeah, you're all on Mentimeter and already people are responding. Excellent, awesome, tired, inspired. I don't know what self-couth means. Is that a Swedish word? Tired, a lot of tired, inspired. Okay. Great, full of impressions. That's cool. Curious. Caffeinated, that's good. Optimistic, curious, shaky, what's going on? Happy, inspired, tired, and excited are some of the biggest ones. Buzzing, I like that. Released, okay, I wonder where that's coming from. Powerful, networked, feeling networked. Hungover, homesick. Restless, satisfied, full of ideas, thankful, networky again. Enriched, that's great. I'm glad. I hope it's from the conference. Feeling part of a network. I'm pretty good. Sick of technology. Sorry to hear that. I mean, it's been 2 years, right? Weary, calm, connected, hopeful. It's really hard to keep track of the newest ones. Physically present, okay. And still I'm happy to see happy, inspired, but of course tired is also big. I'm seeing sleepy, fine. Love technology, okay. Nostalgic. I'm feeling very nostalgic today and I'll explain to you in a minute. And someone wrote Alhamdulillah, so someone who writes in Arabic. All right. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. It's got 49. I don't know how many people are in the room. I'm going to move on to the next question because I'm finding it difficult to keep track now. All right. Yeah. So my next question is, where are you joining from? Just so I have a feel. Shaky from too much coffee, Anna. I get that. All right. Okay. So I'm guessing Sundsvall, if I'm saying that correctly, is going to be the biggest one. But then your office, Denmark, your office. So I'm here in Cairo, Egypt. I am in like a country club kind of space that's close to my daughter's school. I just dropped her off at school and now I'm in this place. So there's other people around me who are listening to the keynote for free, but probably not interested in it at all. We have people from Denmark and Finland and Bristol, UK, and Stirling, I guess UK as well. And Feldin Hall is where the keynote is happening in person, right? Birkenhead, Auckland, and on-site campus. All right. And yeah, several people from their offices, I think. Tampere, Finland as well. Canberra, so another someone from down south on a very Eastern time zone where it's evening your time. Thanks for joining us. Cambridge, UK. I've been to Cambridge. That's, I think, the only place of all these places that I've actually visited. And I might have visited someone's office. I don't know where the office is. So. Okay. All right. So I usually like to start my keynotes and use things like Mentimeter a lot. I'm going to put the link to the slides in the chat for people who are virtual, but it's an easy bit.ly, right? It's bit.ly/uppercase NLC lowercase Bali. So you can always look back at these keynotes to my slides and leave comments for me anytime. It's no problem. I've got a coral reef theme for the keynote today, which I'll explain to you very soon. So just letting you know what to expect today. This is a networked keynote, which I do quite often. So some of the pre-work involves some networking. So it's not all just me saying things, but also sharing with you work I've, gathered from my networks. And during the keynote, your contributions will enrich the keynote. So we're all learning from each other and not just from me. So we're going to be discussing different things. I just checked in and I'm going to ask you a few questions to know a little bit more about your experience with networks. If we were just on Zoom, I would have used the chat or the chat. But because we're hybrid, I'm going to be using Mentimeter the whole time. I'm going to talk to you about my relationship with NLC and why there's a little bit of nostalgia there. And I'll talk to you about coral reefs as networked beings and what we can learn from them. Then I'll focus a little bit more on social justice and network learning, my experience with virtually connecting, share with you a couple of things I've been working on, the equity care matrix and intentionally equitable hospitality, and then hopefully some reflection and Q&A on Mentimeter again. So before I share my my history with the Network Learning Conference, let's ask you a few more questions. So this one is, in what ways does network learning benefit you or people like you? This one might take a while to start answering. So actually, while you guys start answering this one, I'm gonna tell you what this is. This is the Network Learning 2002 proceedings. I don't know if anyone in the room or on Zoom have been to that conference. This was in Lancaster in the UK. And this is the first exposure. I started doing my Master's of Education in E-Learning at the University of Sheffield in 2003. And back in the time, we used WebCT as the learning management system. And they sent us the readings in hard copy. They didn't send them as attachments for some reason or as virtual. And they sent me this hard copy proceedings of the Network Learning Conference. So that was my first exposure. Okay, back to this. In what ways does network learning benefit you or people like you? Sharing practice exposure, problem solving, validation, knowledge connection, structure, shared knowledge, global and local, more and more. Great community for sharing, inspires me and gives me new insights, building connections, professional development, source of inspiration. Some people are saying, I don't know yet. Tuning in from my garden, professional development, ability to learn and connect. And I'm just realizing that it makes it really, I can open these up to read them more clearly. Ability to learn and connect people located around the different world in different context situations, see the world in a different way. I love that. Benefit from other people's research and learning, knowledge sharing, learning, refining, networking, hearing diverse perspectives that help inform ideas, creativity, design, teaching. Unexpected and otherwise impossible learning, possibly, yes, I agree. Access to people and knowledge to learn from, lots of ideas, daily work, building connections. So professional development is showing up a lot. Problem solving, validation of knowledge, challenging your own presumptions and feeling part of a community. That's huge, right? Okay. Great community for sharing and discussing research, I agree. Yes, okay. I think it's repeating the stuff that we've seen before. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is this one. What is possible in meeting in person that is not possible online? And of course, this conference is also one of those, like, some of you are together. What are some of the things that you guys can do when you're together that we can't do when we're joining online? Hugging, for sure, for sure. Although until recently, I was still not hugging, even when I was in person, right? But yeah, definitely the biggest thing I would think I would miss. Sharing food, for sure. Although I don't know if you've ever been in one of these sessions where it's sort of, they send you the recipe and everybody makes it together and you can eat, so you're actually eating the same thing. You're not sharing it, but you're actually having the same meal if you want. Networking, coffee breaks, yes. Touching, nothing. Embodied experiences, nuanced reactions. I think the nuanced reactions is a big one, but I think the hugging and the sharing food stuff is obvious. The nuanced reactions is different. Serendipitous conversations. But that potential and responsibility, also scary. This is one of the interesting things as I talk to you about virtually connecting, about how do you do these networking and coffee breaks and serendipitous conversations online. And some of you who have experienced it may be willing to share a little bit about how that was for you. Getting a fuller sense of a self, of a person, get what kinds of shoes people are wearing. Yeah, I'm actually wearing Birkenstocks. Are those Swedish? I don't know where they're from. But anyway, I had a really long day yesterday and I couldn't wear proper shoes today. I was too tired. Meeting, learning from new people, easier to develop deeper sense of connections because of richer social cues, informal random networking, eye contact, real eye contact, that is true. Catching the paralinguistic cues easier, seeing when someone else also thinks it's brilliant or bullshit, right from their facial expressions, right? Spontaneous chats. Discipline? I don't know what you mean by discipline. Body and space part of the virtual, the screen is in a space, that's true. We are our embodied selves, right? Seeing how tall people actually are. That is always surprising to me when I meet someone face to face. Mixed conversations, many people at the same time, yeah, because there's no this muting and unmuting type of control. Conversation, just one of the community, yeah. Online can be mobile in the moment. Yeah. Staying focused, building relationships, dance, ABBA. Okay, I don't know what that is, but it sounds fun. And someone's plus oneing nothing. Not impossible, but difficult. Peripheral awareness of others and who they are talking with, and if they're open to conversation. That's a really cool thing. Like online, how do you have those cues? You don't really. All right, but what about this? What's possible by online networking that's not possible in person? And maybe we're the best group of people to talk about that, since network learning is our field, right? Maintain connection. Yeah, the sustainability of the connection, right? You don't have to wait until the next time you're in the same space and time as another person. It just can keep going on and on. The chat function, yes, I love the chat function. I have the alternative to it in person, though. I use Slack with my students so they can type all at the same time in Slack and it gets the same. And Mentimeter, doing this right now, right? Meeting more often is possible. When you're, yeah, definitely you can meet more often for sure. Global bodies, global minds, yes. Being contact experts, remote connection with people within the day's work, definitely. Ability to connect with people who cannot travel, and that's a social justice implication, definitely for sure. Asynchronicity, of course, and multitasking and distance connection. I get so much work done during boring meetings that are online, so definitely the multitasking. Yes, nobody getting priority. So when you don't take up someone else's space when you speak, and so you don't feel like you have to interrupt or whatever. And that's a big social justice issue as well, right? Asynchronicity or semi-synchronicity does that. Hiking whilst listening to a keynote. Is that what you're doing? I walk a lot while having meetings online or doing things. Definitely not speaking, but when I'm having a conversation with a small group of people. Overbridging physical distances, staying home. Yeah, especially if you have like a young child or a sick person you're taking care of, this can be great, right? Split attention, but yeah, it's possible in person. It's much harder in person because there's so many more demands, more care of the environment. Yeah, because you're spending money on airplanes and emissions, gas emissions. Digital traces, yes, easier to record, right, and keep it and co-construct knowledge. Understanding someone somewhere else, planning social hierarchies, baking bread. Okay, stop spreading COVID. Yeah, that's true too. Definitely. Find yourself in too many spaces, scope creep, that can happen. Yeah, joining from anywhere geographically, visiting the bathroom. Yeah, that's a big one, actually. That's a pretty big deal. It's pretty important because in person, this gets in the way, right? Spending less time and money on travels. And I guess like you can also eat or drink or whatever, even when, in a conference, you have to wait until the coffee break or something most of the time. And being in physical place gives a deeper sense of immersion. Yes, that is definitely true. All right, I think I went backwards by mistake. It's going forward. All right, I am gonna move on to This one. This is just like off the cuff question. I don't know what the latest news is about Elon Musk, because he was gonna get Twitter, then they said no, then they said yes, then I think they're in the no stage right now. But like, how were you feeling about that whole thing? Are you even on Twitter? I don't know. So yeah, there's quite a few maybe who aren't even on Twitter. Okay. Okay, so quite a few people, like a quarter of you aren't even on Twitter, so that's not relevant. A few are interested in what he might do, and then a third are ambivalent, and a third are worried about how he could destroy Twitter. And I'm sort of in the somewhere between worried and also kind of feeling like I don't know if he can actually do something to destroy Twitter. I went to Mastodon just in case, but I was already on Mastodon. I just went back to it just in case everyone goes there. But I think I don't know. I wonder if there's a limit to how much something can do something he can do about it. But okay, so I'm gonna stop with the Mentimeter for a minute. I'll come back to this question later. So back to my slides. Thank you all for contributing. All right, so my relationship with the Network Learning Conference is, I told you 2003, I was doing my master's in e-learning, University of Sheffield, and they sent me this book. And so that was the first conference I know about and ever that does any kind of e-learning. So it's very special to me. And then in 2018, the virtually connecting for the first time, we did it at the Network Learning Conference. It was the year that I think Jeffrey Knox from Edinburgh and Laura Chernovich from South Africa were keynoting. So the question here is, how many people here even know what I mean by virtually connecting? Do you know what that grassroots movement is? So, you know, not about connecting virtually, but virtually connecting per se. Okay, so most people have no idea what it is, and I'm going to talk to you a lot about it today so that you have a better idea of what it is. And there's 10% of people who've participated in a session or more. I'm guessing that's generous. There may be a few other people, and then there are people who've never participated or watched, but they know what it is. And there isn't anyone who, okay, just watched them. Okay, so just a quick overview of what virtually connecting is. It's a grassroots movement that I co-founded with someone who at the time was a graduate student called Rebecca Hogue. And basically we challenge academic gatekeeping by making those private hallway conversations, the coffee breaks and things like that, they build social capital at face-to-face conferences, right? We make them into public hybrid conversations so that people who can't attend conferences are able to participate. And it started because I couldn't travel to a lot of conferences and I wanted to chat with people, not just attend their keynotes and things like that. So that's where that came from. In 2020, the 2020 online network learning conference, I presented with Daniela Gashago and Nicola Pallet, and we co-authored a redefinition of network learning that ended up with, I think, a lot of people from NLC, and today I'm keynoting. So it's a big, you know, moving from 2003, where this was like the first conference I heard of, to keynoting today. I feel really proud of that. See, these are some pictures from that virtually connecting session that was happening that time. So there's some of us joining with Google Hangouts here at the bottom, and my daughter also, actually, and those folks at the conference. So coral reefs, I don't know if you guys know about this, but Egypt's Red Sea has beautiful coral reefs. So if you're ever here, you should go visit. If you're interested in diving or snorkeling, they're really good. And I was wondering if they're networked beings, because they look like they have a lot going on for them. And so think about things like coral reefs, and they say they have the highest biodiversity of any ecosystem on the planet. So they occupy less than 1% of the ocean floor, but they're home to like 25% of marine life or more. And so thinking about what does it mean when we create spaces where diverse groups and individuals can thrive interdependently in some kind of harmony, because diversity is hard, right? So this is some stuff I found out about coral reefs, ensuring that reserve populations are connected to each other and non-reserve populations are from elsewhere. They allow for recovery from disturbance, and that's a key aspect of resilience. And I wonder if in education, connections and networking help with resilience as well. And in general, connectivity between the reserves should increase as the distance between them decreases. And education, thinking about how it's easy to connect to someone who's physically proximal or whose identity is more similar to us or have a similar context. And it's harder work if they're not, but there's value in doing it, right? And enhancing connectivity may often trade off against the network's ability to representatively sample the system's natural variability. This is, again, if you're connecting to people who are closer to you, you lose the diversity potential, right? Our networks may not be representative. How many people in your network are from a very different culture or a very different country outside of your continent, things like that. And so when I was preparing this keynote, I asked on Twitter, who's a biologist here who can tell me some things about coral reefs? And this from Karen Cangelosi is really helpful, because they're interconnected coral reefs. And as they mature, they migrate and fish, the reefs are the ecosystem, and then corals are one of the organisms that are there. But as an ecosystem, coral reefs and other, they're more resilient and have greater interconnectivity when they're more diverse. And I'm going to skip this one and just say this, which I read and relates to something someone was saying in the Mentimeter, is that corals can teach us how to make cement without mining or emitting greenhouse gases. And I was thinking about how digital networking can be a kind of climate action, right? Help us, and virtually connecting, by connecting people to conferences, even though they weren't traveling, was one way of giving us the learning and professional development in those conversations without the gas emissions, right? The greenhouse gas emissions. So we're going to go back to Mentimeter now. For the next question, which is, all right, so I'm going to go here and I'll tell you what this is that I'm doing. It's a thing called, we're going to go through this, like how do we utilize general digital networks to do things we can't do otherwise. We've sort of done that, and thinking about how can our digital networking reproduce or exacerbate inequalities? How can they redress social injustices? So we'll do this TRIZ. If you've never done it before, it's a liberating structure. Liberating structures are just ways of having really interesting conversations really quickly and really equitably. And so TRIZ normally is done with small groups, but we'll do it as a large group. And TRIZ solves problems creatively by going against your goal. So going anti-goal. So for example, if our goal was to create networks that were socially just, I'm going to ask you, what would you do to create a network? If your goal was to create networks that are not socially just, how would you do it? So think about this. Pretend that your goal was to create networks that were not socially just. High fee for sure. Yeah, that's automatically an economic barrier, right? Invite only, yeah, entry fees. Selected invite of people like me only, yeah. Because you could do invite only stuff that's socially just by making sure it's diverse, right? You can put the put the UK conservatives in charge. Data wall, yeah. Let a few talk, the rest shut up. Yeah, make social income or status the criterion for participation. Demand a particular device. That's a great point. Delete others without any reason. That's a good one. Pay for visibility. Allow beneficial features that you can buy, and then that makes a difference between people. What else? Have languages that is understood by most. Not understood by most, definitely. Networks that would promote and give voice to people who have the most authority. Yeah, so reproducing power, right? Filter applicants by name. Assume everyone is equally abled, for sure. Make interfaces difficult to use. Grades or previous course requirements, yeah. Highly selective minority languages and in jokes, yeah, that's a good one. Reliance on stable internet, high internet bandwidth for participation, yeah. Allow bots to operate. No privacy control. Having one language, require typing for participation. That's a good one. All right, that's interesting. Have the conference close to the beach. Allow beneficial features. Okay, there we go. You see that one. Allow only people taller than 185 centimeters. I'm pretty tall, but I'm not that tall. Probably in Sweden, you'd find a lot of people at that height, but yeah. All right, most of these we've talked so far. All right, so now that you've sort of thought of these, I think thinking about this, look at yourself and look at the things that we've just talked about. Is there anything in your own practice that in any way resembles these practices? And think about, is there one thing that you could do to stop doing these things and prevent that would promote maybe better social justice? And I don't know if I have a question for this on Mentimeter. I'm just going to check the next question if it's not. No, it's not. All right. So it's just something for you to think about, like knowing what some of these things are and what can you personally do to stop that. And so I'm just thinking about, how do we notice social injustice and oppression? And I really find the work of Nancy Fraser helpful here, because social injustice, a lot of times we focus on the economic aspect. Some of you mentioned also ableism, right? But there are also cultural and political elements. Some of you mentioned language, right? That's one of those things. So, you know, with economic injustice, this is me and Mia Zamora sort of paraphrasing this. And so access to digital devices and infrastructures is one kind of economic injustice that happens with digital learning. But also, there's also, of course, economic injustice because someone has to work 3 jobs, so they don't have free time to go to an online conference even, right? And so you can address this by redistribution of resources, or you can redress it systemically by solving systemic problems, right? Cultural injustice is more like erasure or misappropriation of certain cultures, such as like the absence of indigenous and any just non-white cultural perspectives from many Western curricula, right? And can be redressed by reappropriation. But the most important one, I think, is political injustice, and that's the inability to participate in democratic decision-making about one's own fate and circumstances. That can be redressed by participatory parity, which Nancy Fraser talks about. It's not just about bringing someone to the table, but making sure they have an equal voice in the table. And so in the network learning redefinition that Daniela Gashago, Nicola Palas, and I wrote together, we were talking about, of course, network learning has many dimensions, and we're saying no size fits all, but also network learning can redress or reproduce economic, cultural, political inequalities and injustices. So just by being networked, it doesn't automatically promote social justice and doesn't automatically promote inequality. It can go either way, and you have to be really careful about how you design and whether you consider these things. And so I'm going to share with you a story about marginality related to my daughter. I don't know if any of you play solitaire, but it's a game you're supposed to play alone. But my daughter and I play it together. But what usually happens is that we lay it out on the couch, and I'm on one side playing it, and she's on the other side playing it. And then one day I saw her playing it, but she's playing it on her own, but she's playing it upside down. And I realized that she was playing it upside down because her perspective was always the upside down perspective, because I was always the main player. And so we can't see something clearly. We can't see it from all the dimensions unless we see the margins. And we can't see what it looks like from the margins unless we are ourselves in those margins. We tend to see things the way we see them. And then you realize that the people on the margins are seeing them completely differently. And that story of my daughter seeing it that way. And now that she realizes, like the first time this happened, I laughed. Like, oh my God, you're playing it upside down. And now when she's playing with me, she wants to be the dominant one. She wants to be the main player. And she makes me look at it upside down. So I'm going to ask you, in your context, who are the people at the margins that you need to design for? And let me just open the Mentimeter for that. And we'll see what you say. It says there are 3 people who answered, but I can't see the answers. Great participation. I think that was probably the answer to the previous question, right? Students generally are on the margin. People with device running MS Windows, these are people on the margins, because what your main thing is Mac. I don't know what 2L means. Rural and remote students, yeah, rural students, they must have different circumstances, possibly less connectivity. The non-academic, I have no idea what SAPME means. Is this like a minority group, cultural minority? Students with accessibility problems, still used to a more traditional formal learning setup, are sometimes, yeah, very disadvantaged in different places. Quiet people, because with network learning, we expect a lot of participation, right, to make it visible. Those with accessibility issues for sure. Sovereign nations, peoples, teachers at universities. Okay. Students from non-academic homes, right? They don't have the cultural capital. People with little time, definitely. Management, are people at the margins, are they? Second language, yes, people for whom this is not their first language. Students with problems socially or psychologically, definitely. Who lack language, very young students, socially disadvantaged students, so economically speaking, peers afraid of educational tech. Those are sometimes the people on the margins if you're supporting people, which is the kind of work I do. Older students, mature age, because their circumstances are different than what you expect, the default, right? People with few publications, so if you're in a university and you're supporting that. Students with young children, for sure, because their time is so different, right? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. And what are some instances you designed something from the margins that benefited others? So where you were designing something and your intention was to support people who are in the margins, and it ended up benefiting others. I'm going to share this quick story of, I don't know if you guys know about the curb cut effect, but it's like, you know, when you design a ramp to allow people on wheelchairs to go up on a sidewalk or a pavement, but then it also benefits people who are just, they've got a stroller bag or a stroller with a child in it or a bicycle. And so people who aren't necessarily disabled, they don't have an accessibility issue, but everyone benefits, even though it was actually meant to benefit particular marginalized groups. So I'm curious of instances you designed something from the margins that benefited others. Sign language voices done at your presentations. Okay, nice. Allocating students to groups meant to support. Who was it meant to support to, and how was it helpful to others? Using concrete materials to teach maths to young children. So was it meant to support a very particular group, but then everyone enjoyed it? Using plain English simple sentence structures to express complex ideas and concepts. Yeah, the ones who are privileged aren't going to be harmed by that. Everyone will benefit from something like that. Online participation events to include more people, but also benefited others. Good troublemaking. I know sometimes people who are in a conference and then they go, they still go to their hotel room and join virtually sometimes. Using video and not text, writing clinics, signposting and online learning, I think does support a lot of different people. What else? A hub in a rural area for citizens to virtually access education at the university. Keeping instructions short and clear. Deaf and hard of hearing resources for teaching K-12. Yeah, using multimodalities definitely seems to help a lot of different people. Okay, I am going to move on now and tell you a little bit more about some of the kinds of things. I think virtually connecting, so just to explain virtually connecting a little bit more, was me as someone from the global south who can't afford to go to a lot of conferences, both financially and socially, because I had a young child. And so, my partner in starting this was someone who could go to conferences, but also had other issues. And she was a graduate student, so she could afford and physically was closer to conferences because she was based in the US at the time, but she didn't know a lot of people at conferences. So when we started doing virtually connecting, we would have a conversation with people who are in the conference and people virtually who couldn't join. I did it for myself, but I also made it open to other people. And what I discovered is that there are all kinds of people who are off the margins, not just me, which I'm going to talk to you about a little bit. But it's about designing from the margins, or even like right off the margins, people who aren't even being considered at all, but not designing for the margins. Like if you're the most privileged group of people designing for the margins, you imagine what they need, maybe you try to empathize and you do it. But when you design from the margins, the people themselves who are designing it are themselves in the margins, so they know exactly how it feels to be there, like my daughter did looking at the solitaire from the other side. If you're not there, you don't imagine how they might feel or what they might need. You might think there's something happening that they're not happy with, but you may not know what's the best way to go about it. And recognizing that people on different locations on the margin see things differently. And so what's really important, and this is work that we've adapted from indigenous work, is it's very different to say I'm going to do something to someone to help them or for them than to say I will do it with them or let them do it by themselves, you know, and or even let them do it as themselves in whatever way. So just to show you a very quick example of this, I was telling my daughter what this means in terms of her eating. So when she was a baby, I would make food to her and give it to her, assuming what's good for her. When she's a little bit older, I could say, oh, do you want a cereal or a sandwich for dinner? So I'm making it for her, but she's getting to choose maybe from the options that I offer. But when I make it with her, she can do it slightly differently than how I would do it. She can pick a few ingredients from the fridge and do something slightly different. And she can, now that she's 10, she can actually make it by herself. She doesn't need me to be with her. She can do it by herself. But if she was able to do it as herself, she could actually go and buy the ingredients that she wants from the supermarket. Now think about what this might mean for education. A lot of times we're offering a particular thing, sometimes just one path, everyone has to do the same thing. Sometimes we offer different pathways, but we as the teachers are deciding what the pathways are. But what if the students had more choices of what they wanted in the pathways? And what if we let the students develop their own pathways with each other? And what if they had complete freedom to design whatever they wanted without even our approval for giving them accreditation? This is really, the as level is really hard to do in education if it needs to be accredited, but the with and the by are possible. And a lot of times we talk about designing for and with students, but we rarely reach the stage of letting students design for themselves. So I just want you to think about what might be possible with that. And Daniela, Nicola, and I have several papers on this. And you know, if you're going to decolonize knowledge, prioritizing the interest of the least advantage is the main thing, right? That's what we need to do. So virtually connecting is an example of this open connected hybridity, and equity and bound, which is another thing that I've done, is open connected intercultural. But again, the people designing it are often people from the margins. And the idea is socially just care needs to be distributed and networked, not scaled. So when you think about, this is a biomimicry example of, there's these starlings are kinds of birds, and the way they follow each other, but the way they do it is not that they have one leader and everyone follows the leader. Every bird is responsible for 6 or 7 neighbors, and they just react to how their neighbors behave. So it's not that every single person is doing following the same person, the same bird, but that you're connected to 6 or 7 close by. And the way virtually connecting worked, and I know a lot of you have not experienced this, is that there was one person, a virtually connecting volunteer called the on-site buddy, responsible for the on-site guests, who are maybe 3, 4, 5, 6. And the virtual folks had a virtual buddy who was responsible for them. They were no more than 9 people actually, because Hangouts had that limit. So you had the on-site person and the virtual person had someone responsible for them. And I don't know how many of you have this experience with high flex teaching, where you have students joining virtually and in person, a little bit like what we're doing today, I guess, but in a class. It really makes a difference to make it a smoother experience if there's someone taking care of the virtual folks and someone taking care of the on-site folks, and helping that connection so that everyone's able to participate equitably. So another thing to think about virtually connecting is that we're border crossing. We're trying to say there shouldn't be a border stopping some people from attending conferences and others as only the ones who attend. I'm going to go a little bit faster through this because we've only got 20 minutes left. So I'm not going to ask this question to you, but there was this quote of, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, from Shirley Shisham, who's one of the, I think, first African-Americans to run for president, and she was a senator or something. And I have a concern about this, because if you look at a table like this one, it's really difficult to bring a folding chair to a table that looks like this, right? Like you would be a second-class citizen. And so sometimes I used to think of virtually connecting as bringing a folding chair to a table, but then we started to realize that we were actually creating alternative spaces, right, for people to connect outside of what was happening. It was always free to participate. It was widening access. And I'm going to move on from here because I want to show you some examples of people who benefited from virtually connecting. And what we realized is it wasn't about bringing a folding chair, but it was about creating a new table on the margins and extending those invitations. And we had our own rules. We eventually started to realize, oh, well, we're going to not only invite keynote speakers, but also invite less privileged people who are there who are speaking. How are we going to prioritize who we bring, right? So I'm a mom from the global south, but there were other people facing visa bans, and graduate students who didn't have funding, and contingent academics who don't have full-time jobs and they don't have funding, or just people who are shy extroverts, so they like being with people, but they're shy to walk up to people. And what we realized is that the people who were at the conferences who were supporting virtually connecting were themselves making connections that otherwise they wouldn't be able to walk up to the keynote speaker and tell them, give me half an hour of your time. But because we were inviting them virtually connecting ahead of time, they could go and say, oh, I'm the person that I'm connecting you today, right? So Rebecca Hogue, who's the co-founder and was a graduate student in time, she said, as a result of the experience, her social capital has increased. And it's very hard for social capital that's developed online to continue face-to-face for some people. And so that helped her develop that. Autumn Keynes was talking about that it was serendipitous because we came in for a conversation. There wasn't anyone preparing to talk about anything in particular, just talk about whatever, tell me how the conference has been. And people could react and reflect together. And she said it was like bumping into someone at a conference to chat over coffee. Carissa Miran, who's an Iranian, and her visa got refused to a lot of different countries. And to her, virtually connecting tore down walls and made bridges and connections and connect people regardless of their nationality. Suzan Kosyoglu, who's a Turkish who lived in the UK, talked about how virtually connecting, she's shy and she's uneasy about she's uneasy, right? But because her schooling imposed these structures and hierarchies, and she would never be able to talk to someone influential in the field, but she managed to do that through virtually connecting. And Michael Berman would talk about how virtually connecting virtualized the right part of the conference, the personal interaction. This is Lisa Hammersheim, who's a PhD student, talking about having limited income, but that virtually connecting allowed her. You know, when you read, and I'm sure all of you have this experience, when you read someone for many years and then suddenly you meet them face to face and you can actually have a regular conversation with them, it can be a little bit intimidating. But with virtually connecting, you can get to see someone and not just the final paper, but get to talk to them about their unfinished thoughts, right? This not polished perfection kind of thing. And then Christian Friedrich, who is German, he said that what virtually connecting did, he's someone who goes to a lot of conferences, but virtually connected made the invisible online lurkers of a conference more visible to organizers. So people could realize who's missing, who's not there. And Sharon Spielitz was talking about inclusion as a construction project. It has to be engineered. It's not going to happen on its own. And virtually connecting was all about doing that, you know? So I'm going to move on from here. And actually, I'm going to skip a lot of these tweets that people sent about virtually connecting because I want to create more room for talking about other things and questions. But you can always look at these slides later, right? But of course, even something like virtually connecting meant to be like this, in the end, still has social justice issues. So sometimes people felt like we were cliquish. Even though we did this invitation aspect, people still didn't always feel like they could join, or they started to see the same group of people often and they weren't sure that this is something. It was also not truly accessible to everyone because we usually spoke English. We did occasionally say, oh, by the way, there's someone in this room who speaks another language, and occasionally someone would speak in another language and one of us would translate, but we didn't do it consistently. And of course, connectivity. We were using Google Hangouts, which is not very, not bad with bad internet connections, but some people had really, really bad internet connections or their electricity would cut out, right? And also, some countries, I think, don't have Google or YouTube. I think China, maybe. And then sometimes it reproduces power differences because you're bringing in the keynote speaker and giving them even more of a platform. But sometimes we were bringing people who have less power. So it goes up and down with that, like it could happen. But we tried to be more careful about introducing people of color and marginalized and people from the global south and bringing them and amplifying their voices as well. And also we realized that if you say anybody's welcome, a lot of the people who will come to you are white men. So you have to do very personal invitations to women and people of color and people who are more marginalized and earlier career people. And then we were being very spontaneous, but that we evolved our processes because there was a tyranny of structurelessness. Like the less structure you have, the more implicit structure there is that some people are privy to and some people are not. And so, yeah, thinking about how do you scale out, and we were burning out, and so we started to sort of distribute the care, right? So that there were certain people responsible for certain regions. So whoever is doing, conferences in Canada, and then North America, they would, figure it out. They didn't need everyone to work with them because of the time zones and all that. And also that hospitality doesn't scale. So even though we were open to volunteers, we need to constantly work on maintaining our ethos. And we started to develop this ethos called intentionally equitable hospitality, which I'll talk about soon. But a lot of times, any table, any kind of space you create will exclude some people. So a lot of times people said, oh, virtually connecting is like a campfire. And I was thinking, what if someone can't sit on the floor? That's not going to be comfortable. What if you can't get near a fire? Some people are afraid of that. Or what if you're not comfortable being around people, if you're on the autism spectrum? What if you have a disability? How does it look from afar? And, COVID, these people are so close to each other. It would have been scary during COVID, right? I'm going to move on from here. So let's talk a little bit more about intentionally equitable hospitality. And I'll talk to you about something called the Equity Care Matrix, which is a networked model of thinking about equity and care that I've worked on with Mia Zamora. What we did is we went on Twitter and we asked people, what is equity without care and what is care without equity? And Kate Bowles from Australia said the power to choose how others will be treated. So both care and equity are problematic because there's still power there. And Nancy Fraser talks about parity of participation, which I mentioned before. Thinking about this quote from Desmond Tutu, he's saying, I'm not interested in picking up crumbs of compassion thrown from the table of someone who considers himself my master. I want the full menu of rights. But I think that's not even enough. I think we should be able to create our own menu and choose our own ingredients. Like I was showing you with that, my daughter going to the supermarket and choosing what she wants rather than just building her meal with what I made available for her. And so when we think about what is equity without care, some people said it's like tokenism, because you can have equity but no care, or it's diversity theater. But some people said that it's structural and it solves some problems, because if you have equity as a policy, then people can't undo that with carelessness. And Don Langlow talked about how, structures need to have equity because an institution doesn't have to care for you. You don't need empathy, you need justice, right? And then in terms of what is care without equity, Autumn Kane says it's like a coping mechanism. That's how you deal with environments that don't have equity. And Catherine Cronin talked about how it's care for a few, the few who are seen. So it's selective, right? And it's effective labor too. So we hope that, we think, if you don't have care or equity, that's systemic injustice. And we hope that if you have both equity and care, you have something like intentionally equitable hospitality. So we decided, Mia Zamora and I, we have a paper on this called the Equity Care Matrix, that equity without care is contractual equity. You have it written down, but doesn't mean that's happening. Equity, no equity, but with care would be partial care. It's partial as in not everyone gets it, not everyone gives it, but it's also partial in the meaning that it's biased towards the people that you think deserve care. And socially just care, we think, is when everybody feels that it's their responsibility to promote equity and care. And intentionally equitable hospitality is all about that. It's a facilitation praxis that we developed with Virtually Connecting, but that you can use in your classrooms and in any other place. And you think that you need to be intentional about promoting equity and recognizing your role as a host, as the facilitator of a space. You can't say, oh, it's going to be open for everyone, so it's going to be fair and equitable. It's not. You have to pre-design it, design it, and in the moment, facilitate it, and in the teaching moment, respond. And also beyond the moment, sustain the community, which a lot of you talked about when you said what networking allows, right? So in the pre-design, who do you consult even in the process of imagining your design? Do you contact your past students? Do you discuss with colleagues from diverse and especially marginalized backgrounds to help you imagine what your students might need? And when you design, sometimes a lot of people sometimes think about equity and flexibility as being flexible in the moment when something goes wrong, but you actually need to anticipate power inequalities and prepare for them and see what you can redress a priori before you even meet them, and then make flexibility part of your design and leverage it and have open pathways and have different options and design ways that are participatory in themselves and have emergence and learner agency baked into it by design. And then, of course, in the moment, there will always be unanticipated things, and how you promote psychological safety so that people can speak up when something goes wrong, or help you as the teacher see, because when you're online, you don't see the nuanced nuances. You have to ask, you have to make that extra work. And then you move from safe to brave spaces, hopefully, where people can be comfortable making difficult conversations. And then how do you practice what Adrienne Marie Brown calls intentional adaptation? So you can change in the moment in order to help you reach your goal that's very clear to you. And then beyond the moment, how do you sustain community so that you can keep iterating beyond a particular teaching moment to reflect and imagine how to do better next time, and have the community working together in between the moment that you're together and the design of the next moment, whenever that moment may be. And so things about intentionally equitable hospitality are about prioritizing listening to the most marginalized voices, ensuring participants have agency, select topics and people they want to read and listen to. So with Virtually Connecting, we always prioritize who the virtual participants want to listen to in the in-person, from the in-person conference. Which conferences did they want to go to, right? And the participants always feel most comfortable, participate in the way they're comfortable, Some of you talked about, not requiring people to do things in certain ways. So for me, letting students participate via audio or chat with their cameras on or off, whatever they want to do. And in recorded conversations, having time before and after a session that are less formal and unrecorded creates a huge amount of space for people who are more shy or new to this to get more comfortable. Speaking and interacting. And then there's definitely having semi-synchronous spaces. And what appears with Virtually Connecting is that people see the recorded conversations that were streamed to YouTube, but actually we had a Slack team that was chatting beyond. When we invited people, we had email and Twitter private conversations that you don't see, but that helped explain to that person what to expect and get to know us and so on. Okay, and I am actually almost done here. I wanted to invite you to something called MyFest. This is mid-year festival, and we call it mid-year because it's not summer for everyone. It's going to be winter for people in the Southern Hemisphere. So the mid-year festival is June, July, August. Choose your own learning pathway. What do you want to learn in the summer? There are lots of different options. We hope it will be an equitable, emergent, creative, caring community. So it's just myfest.equityunbound.org. Registration is now open. It's a pay what you can, so it is not always free, but if you cannot pay, we will offer you a promo code to pay less or pay nothing. And it's going to have different topics. So this is our idea of what we think professional development should be. To be equitable, emergent, creative, caring. Some things are designed in advance and some things you can create. Some of the sessions are conversational, like virtually connecting, and some of them are going to be workshops and things like that, but no like 1 hour talks like what I just did right now. Because we think people are burnt out and we need a recharge and renewal experiences. So we're going to have topics related to open education and digital literacies, but also well-being and joy and social justice and community building and things like that. So I'm almost done. I just have a question or two for you on Mentimeter, but I just wanted to share my email, my Twitter. And if you have time to give me feedback on my keynote, it's bit.ly/Bali keynotes. And just letting you know that my daughter helps design my slides because she deserves to get recognized for that. And I learned how to say thank you in Swedish, but I'm not sure if I'm going to say it correctly. Is it tack så mycket? I don't know if I've said it right. But just one more question on, 2 questions on Mentimeter, I think, coming up. I'm just going to skip this one because I decided to skip it when we were in it. All right. Could you share with me one of your key takeaways from today? And Jen, I noticed you wrote something in the chat, and I agree with you about this, the importance of seeing people when they're not polished. I mean, it works really well with, because I know Jen, I know her work on messiness and things like that, so that's kind of central to your ethos, right? Design on the margin, not from the margin. Okay. Global is including all. Biological metaphors. Yeah, so if you like biological metaphors, you should read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And there's a book called Biomimicry as well, but I haven't finished reading that one. Someone learned that keynotes can be interactive. Okay, thank you. No folding chairs. Good. The margin perspective. Designing from the margins, not for. Okay. Think about designing at the pre-design phase for those on the margins. All the blind spots we have. Yes. Haven't done enough for marginalized students. Margins. Okay. Bird analogy for high flex. I love that one, right? It's so cool. Biological metaphors are tricky. Yeah, they can go wrong. They can go wrong, these biological metaphors. I mean, definitely with the coral reefs, I almost went off track. And like if someone's a biologist, they're probably saying, you said something wrong about, coral reefs or whatever. Bringing them all on board, thinking of diverse needs at the margins. Energy. Okay, the Starling thing, yeah, it's so nice. You can actually watch a video of it, and it's really amazing how they do that. Theoretical framework for what you're trying to do. I'm so happy to see that. I don't know what it is, especially of the things that I said, but I'm good. That conferences and Twitch, I can't see the rest of that. Any perspective on a project we're designing? Okay. This is actually tricky, this the Mentimeter with this kind of scrolling thing, because I sometimes miss things. But I hope that I'm getting most of what you guys have written. Okay. Importance of inclusion, liberating structures, I'm guessing. Okay. Proactive ideas about equitable hospitality. Twitch streaming are starting to resemble, okay, there's something more here, isn't there? Okay, nothing, all right. Social justice is now part of your networking, okay. Am I learning to say thank you in Swedish? Okay, that's your key takeaway. All right. Okay, I'm gonna, I think, move on to give you guys a chance to ask questions. Thank you all so much for contributing, and I said it well. Oh, that's great. Thank you. I have a trick for pronouncing Åsa's name, and it's like I read it like an O and an A. So, oh, can I share all your answers in Menti with all of you? I think so. I guess it's going to send me a report. So, Anna was sending a private message about that. I can definitely.
So, is it time to say thank you? if I understand it right, you're taking all the questions on Menti and answering them afterwards.
Oh, is that what you guys want? You want me to answer them separately?
No, maybe I just misunderstood.
Okay. There aren't any questions, so like this is a moot point at this point. but if I think usually I have so much interaction in my keynotes that people don't have questions at the end. They've talked so much already, but it's okay. I'll wait a minute. I know we're exactly at 11:29, so ruminating. Yeah, they still need more time to reflect. I've overwhelmed them already. I'll consider that one answered. It's very funny what Mentimeter just did there. Do you see? No questions. You're doing awesome. That was very funny. Given how hard it is, okay, to be equitable, what do you do to not give up? That is such an important question. So what I do not to give up is surround myself with people who have the same goals and intentions. Because I was just in a meeting yesterday, I'll tell you guys, with people who want to work on gender equity on campus, and groups of them were saying we can't do this in a participatory manner because it doesn't work and blah, blah, blah. And I keep saying, you don't start by saying I've done it before and it doesn't work. You start by saying my goal is to do this in the best, the most inclusive, participatory, equitable way possible. And you keep trying to make it work. You don't just say I've done it before and it doesn't work, so I'm going to do it in a bad way now. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit the ethos. So I think definitely most of those people that inspire me are in my networks, my online networks. They're not in my institution, but because I blog and tweet and so on, so people in my institution who have the same ethos find me online, and then we meet each other face to face. So it's about building allyships with people maybe not in your own department or your immediate vicinity, but maybe people on your campus who do something similar. And you know, making your intentions very clear, as much as it is safe for you to speak out loud about these things, people will find you and know you. And when I speak in public in my institution, sometimes like in a very big meeting about something related to equity, some people will support me right then and there, orally or in the chat or whatever, and other people will contact me privately and say they support me. And that's how I know the more you're able to speak up, the safer it is for you to speak up, the more likely you are to meet other people who are like you, and they will support you, whether by doing the work with you or at least letting you know in the background if it's working well. And I think that makes a huge difference. What is your view on care being a relational term, not just being for someone, but there are, yeah. So Mia and I talk about noddings quite a bit in our work, and we also talk about Joan Tronto's work also about socially just, well, she calls it democratic care. So yeah, the one that cared for needs to recognize the care. And you know what else? The one that's being cared for needs to have a say in how they want to be cared for, right? And one of the issues related to what I was saying right now is that when you're in a situation where you're caring for someone who can't reciprocate. So I mean, there are relationships that are relatively equal, like marriage, you know, some relationships should be relatively equal, where you give and take, and sometimes you're caring, sometimes you're cared for. Other relationships that are unequal, like teaching, the teacher always has more power, the doctor and the nurse always have more power, the parent always has more power. There's still some degree of reciprocity that the person comes back and says, this is how I want to be, you know, I feel like cared for, I appreciate what you've done for me. There's another element of, do we even ask them how they want to be cared for? And one of the, can we care with them rather than care for them? You know, remember that other diagram with the 2, 4, with, by, as? Can we decide together, this is how I want to be cared for? So for example, for an older child, they could decide that how they want you to care for them is not to hug them, but to hold hands, for example. And with students, sometimes you think that being flexible is what's going to make them happy, but if you ask them, some people actually want deadlines to help them manage their time. So these are things that it's opening this up to a negotiation. And then the other element of it is, if you're the person who's always in the position of caring for others, which is, for me, I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, and I'm also a faculty developer. So during the pandemic, I was supporting my entire institution, all my faculty, all my department, my own child, and so on. You need a community that cares for you so that you can nourish yourself with them. And for me, these were my online networks. We had a group of us that were supporting each other, and everyone had ups and downs, but we were supporting each other to give ourselves energy to care for other people. All right. Let me know if I need to stop, but I'm gonna. Isn't it impossible to not to exclude? Yes, it's impossible not to exclude. You will always exclude. The question is, who do we exclude, why and how, or can and should everyone be included? And the question with this is, I think one of the things you're saying is as if it's only one person or two people who have the power to include and exclude. But if you distribute the care, not everyone has to be cared for in the same way, and people can choose how they want to be cared for and care for each other and support each other. So students helping each other in small groups rather than you always doing it for them, having these different pathways, and all the time there will be someone new. So for example, if you've never taught a blind student, the first time you teach a blind student, you're going to learn something new about inclusion, and you may be able to take it further into other things. I think there will always be a surprise thing that you didn't imagine ever facing, and you have to prepare for that. But the next time, your portfolio of different inclusion things that you do will increase and get better, and you hone your skills in these things. This is my take on that. Yesta talks about the duty in his keynote. What are your thoughts on duty? I'm sorry I missed that keynote, so I don't know, but someone like Noddings talks about care as virtuous care, which is done as duty, and that's kind of problematic. But that to me would be kind of like in the equity care matrix, it would be the contractual care. You have it down as something that should be done as policy or whatever, and it's important to have it, not important not to have it. But if you're doing it without genuine care and relational care for actual human beings, I think it's missing something. But I have no idea what Besta was talking about, sorry. You all need to care for people so there is value in giving others opportunities to care. I agree. Okay, I think I am done answering the questions. Yeah, we need to stop. Okay.
Perfect. Perfect timing, I think, and thank you so much for this really generous sharing and all the insights and inspiration.